The officers barely glanced at her as she entered the room, their expressions tight with authority. To them, she was just another black woman in a place she didn't belong. They spoke over her, dismissed her presence, and carried on as if she were invisible. But she noticed everything, the way that arrogance filled the space, the way their assumptions dripped from every word. They had no idea who she was. Then came the moment that shifted everything. As they sat waiting, confident and unbothered, the door opened again. She stepped forward, but this time not as an observer. She took her seat at the bench. The air in the room changed instantly. Their faces stiffened, eyes widening in disbelief. The very woman they had underestimated, disrespected, and ignored was the judge, the one with the power to decide their fate. And in that moment, the weight of their misjudgment became painfully clear. A heavy silence settled over the room. The officers, who had been so sure of themselves moments ago, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the weight of his own actions. The other stole a glance at his partner, as if searching for an explanation, a way to make sense of what was happening. But the judge didn't need an explanation. She had seen this before, too many times. She had spent years watching people like them walk into spaces with the same entitlement, the same quiet assumptions about who held power and who didn't. And now, as their fate rested in her hands, she could see it dawn on them. She remained composed, her expression unreadable. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for justice. But as she picked up the case file and scanned the details, she wondered, would they finally understand what fairness really looked like? The judge flipped through the case file, her face giving nothing away. She could feel the officers watching her, their confidence now replaced with uncertainty. The charges against them were serious: misuse of authority, misconduct on duty. They had walked into this courtroom believing they held all the power, but now they sat across from the very system they once thought they controlled. One of the officers finally spoke, his voice tight. "Your Honor, there must be some misunderstanding." His words were careful now, respectful in a way they hadn't been before. She looked up, meeting his eyes. She could see it, the quiet panic, the realization that the same system they had upheld without question might now hold them accountable. But was their fear rooted in justice, or simply in the fact that, for once, the rules didn't work in their favor? As the courtroom sat in heavy silence, the judge knew one thing: this was just the beginning. The judge set the file down, her fingers resting lightly on the pages. The officers sat stiffly, their earlier arrogance now replaced with something they weren't used to: helplessness. Their uniforms, once a symbol of authority, did nothing to shield them from the weight of the law. The power they had taken for granted was slipping through their fingers, and they knew it. She took a slow breath, letting the tension in the room settle. "You stand accused of misconduct," she said, her voice steady. "Abuse of power, violating the very oath you swore to uphold." Her gaze moved between them, watching their discomfort deepen. "Tell me, officers, how do you plead?" A long pause. One officer opened his mouth, then closed it. The other shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. The reality of the moment had finally sunk in. This wasn't a routine hearing. This was a reckoning. And there was no easy way out. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. The officers exchanged glances, their confidence unraveling with every passing second. Then, just as one of them was about to speak, the courtroom doors creaked open. A clerk hurried inside, a folder clutched tightly in his hands. He whispered something to the judge and slid the papers onto her desk. She picked them up, her eyes scanning the new information. And then something shifted. Her expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of something, understanding, disbelief, crossed her face. She looked up at the officers again, but this time, there was something different in her gaze. She tapped the papers against the desk, her voice calm but firm. "It seems there's more to this case than we thought." She let the words hang in the air, watching their faces carefully. "New evidence has come to light." The officers sat frozen. Whatever was in that file, they hadn't expected it. And now they were no longer just defending themselves. Something bigger was at play. The judge placed the new documents in front of her, the weight of the truth settling in. The officers, already tense, leaned forward slightly, their faces rigid with unease. Whatever they had been expecting, it wasn't this. She took a steady breath. "This new evidence suggests a pattern," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "Complaints filed, reports altered, cases dismissed before they could ever reach a courtroom." She let the words sink in. "You see, this isn't just about one incident. This is about a system that has protected you, until now." One officer's face drained of color. The other clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. We didn't," he started, but the judge raised a hand, cutting him off. She looked at them, her expression unreadable. "You thought you were untouchable," she said, "but the law doesn't work like that." Then she reached for her gavel, just as another door opened, and a senior investigator walked in. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a warrant. "There's more." The officers stiffened. The case wasn't just about misconduct anymore. It was about corruption, and now there was nowhere left to hide. The courtroom remained still as the senior investigator stepped forward, handing over the warrant. The judge took a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. The officers, once so sure of their power, sat motionless, their world unraveling before them. They had walked in expecting control, but now they were at the mercy of the very system they had taken for granted. She turned back to them, her voice steady. "The law applies to everyone," she said, "even those who once thought they were above it." With that, she lifted her gavel and brought it down, sealing their fate. As the officers were escorted out, the judge remained at her bench, watching them go. Justice had been served, but she knew this case was just one of many. The fight for fairness didn't end here. But today, at least, the system had worked the way it was meant to.